This panel, it's going to be exploring the question of how we respond to the issues raised by the Black Lives Matter movement. We've got a panel which is Tim and Kwame, who I know you know already because you've been involved in the conference already. And I'm delighted to welcome Claudia Iton, who's former HR director at Unilever and now director at Replete Consulting. We've got about 3/4 of an hour and some really interesting, important issues to talk about. I think the four of us are probably in the same state of mind as many of you, which is that we spoke all 24 hours ago just to prepare for the session, and it looked very, very gloomy in America. There may be some Trump supporters in on this conversation, in which case I apologize to you for my assumptions, but it looks a little bit more positive now. But I'm delighted to be able to have a break from being obsessed with Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, which is where my head's been most of the night. So look, the first kind of issue I want to talk about is to say, what is this moment? And I want to bring myself into the conversation. I'm going to chair, but I'm a chief executive of an organization. And so for me, this has been a really interesting, fascinating and challenging period of time as well. So the question I want to ask you first, panel, is what is this moment? And just to frame that, you know, I would say this, that for me, in terms of my own career, as someone who has always seen myself as, you know, complacently seen myself as progressive and on the side of inclusion and anti-racist, and, you know, I've been trogging along thinking, you know, I'm a good guy, this is all fine. And then this summer, and the response to the murder of George Floyd and the questions that has arisen has absolutely smashed through my complacency. It has been an incredibly challenging time. And, you know, I'm not saying that because I'm saying, you know, I'm a victim of this in any way, but it's been, and I have been more personally challenged. And that phrase that I had heard before and always kind of thought was a little bit of slightly woke jargon, check your privilege, has absolutely come home to me in the last few months, you know, in terms of questioning my own legitimacy, questioning the complacency that I've shown towards the issue of racism, looking at my own organization, the RSA, you know, 260-year-old organization that is implicated itself in our colonial past. And also just seeing the really powerful feelings that my own staff have had about this issue and their own experiences, which have been quite hard for me to recognize. It's been going on around me and I haven't been recognizing people's feelings. And also from RSA fellows who just to finish on this, we made an initial response to George Floyd, and our fellows said, this is not enough. This is not strong enough. It's not brave enough. It's not good enough. And we really had to have a big conversation about that. And we issued another statement and have taken our work much further. So for me, this has been a really powerful moment. And I think the big question, and this is the question I want to pose to you particularly, panel, when I ask you what is this moment, is when something really intense like this happens, there's one view that says it's changed the world forever. And there's another view which is, well, no, it's been a kind of collective spasm. You know, we've all kind of gone through something, but you can't maintain this level of intensity. And then people will move on, it will lose focus, and we'll look back on it and go, well, why did nothing happen there? So I'm interested in your views, panel, as to what you think this moment has been over the last few months and is going forward. So, Claudia, let's start with you.
Thank you, Matthew. I relate to so much that you've just shared. I mean, after the tragedy of George Floyd's death and everything that followed, yesterday was tough to handle, particularly through the lens of the realizing that over 68 million Americans cast their vote for Stand Back and Stand By. That stung. So, when the George Floyd conversation began, lots of people had it to say that that's an America thing. It's not going to happen here in the UK. But I think it caused us to have a look at what life is like here as well. And it prompted the conversation that we're having today, which I think is useful. And it's helpful to ask, have we made progress? What is this moment? Is it any different, or is it just one long, continuous, unending, unchanging situation? And I think things are better than when my parents first arrived in this country and they were the notorious signs of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. And I have to acknowledge that I live a life that contains privilege. But at the same time, we have work to do. We still have work to do. I've been pulled aside for the crime of driving while black. My sons have been pulled aside for no apparent reason. Thank goodness they haven't been stopped and searched, not that. It seems being 6'5" and 6'8" acts as a reasonable deterrent to that kind of thing. My daughter and my daughter-in-law are 5 times more likely to die from complications of pregnancy than their white counterparts. I don't want my grandchildren to be excluded from school or to be stopped and searched when they grow up, or to find it harder to find a job when they've left university, or to have the same pay as their peers, but the odds are against them. In this society, all those things are real today. The George Floyd tragedy fell on a world that was reeling from COVID, and I really think that created the moment for the reflection and the response that we had, because Lord knows he wasn't the first instance of his kind. But the encouraging thing, the heartening thing for me this time was that it was picked up by millennials and Gen Z all around the world, people of color and people not of color, all hues. And they're really consistent on this one. And as a result of that, there are lots of corporations and brands that have taken a cue from them, because they recognize that, ironically, as the name of our conference suggests, this is future talent. These people are the future consumers, the future workforce of our society, and they are not having it. They want brands and corporations, not just governments, to step up and close this gap, to do something about social justice. And I take a lot of heart from that. And there's signs that are coming through. Recently, Legal and General, I mean, they control one of the largest funds in terms of investment in this country and elsewhere. And they made the commitment that they will vote against organizations that do not have at least one minority ethnic person on their boards by the end of next year. So we're getting clout. We're seeing action behind the rhetoric that's coming through. But days like yesterday caused me to pause, because there's still a lot of push on the other side. It's so easy for stand by and stand back to hold sway. So the fight isn't over. We have a lot to fight for, and I'm invested in it. But I take heart from what I see. I think this is a special moment.
Great. Well, thank you, Claudia. And thank you also for introducing at the end just one example of kind of a practical step that's been taken. And I'm really keen that we get onto that. But before we do, again, I want to ask you first, Kwame, what's your sense of what this moment is? And have you been impacted, as Claudia has, by what happened in America, and by possibly the challenge to our assumption that everybody sees things in the same way as we might do?
Thank you, and Claudia, I loved the way you framed that. And I would answer it by I think I'm part of the living embodiment of many of the things that you have spoken about. I have a 15-year-old son. He's not yet reached the deterrent of 6'8", but he's about 6'2", 15, and stopped by the police, stopped and searched, handcuffed, etc., etc. I have other children post-degree who have found it hard to find meaningful employment. So I think when, and Matthew, your question was rather wonderful. I think it would be churlish to say, in particular, post Doreen Lawrence, that we have not moved as a country, and we have not. But much like America denies class, and I lived there for 7 years, ran a major institution there. So I think that I have a opinion. Doesn't mean that it's 100% true, but I have a opinion based on lived experience. But I have found that America denies class in the way that Britain denies race. I loved your framing when you said that, and I believe you to be true, that there are many of our progressive liberal friends who have marched for South Africa to be liberated when it was under apartheid, who have stood on the side of Stephen Lawrence inquiries when we've spoken about institutionalized racism, and that have moved the dial forward in every aspect of our society. So it would be churlish not to recognize that good work pre this moment, but also to recognize that this moment is saying we are now talking about, in particular, structural anti-Black racism. There is a difference between diversity and anti-Black racism, and in particular, anti-Black male racism and its manifestations. And I think that this is the moment that I think that our society has grasped that diversity, in my humble opinion, has been used as a cover to go everybody but Black, because really we're afraid of who you are. That Black women, in terms of employment statistics, that Black women have we've not really paid enough attention to how they have been ignored in the workplace and alienated in the workplace, and had attitudes and assumptions placed upon them, that they have an attitude, quote unquote, that they're not coming to work with the right hair, that they come from a single parent background, and that they are somehow the matriarch behind the Black family that has an absent Black father. And they have to walk into work environments and not only negotiate with that, but then try and move forward in that environment. I think we have not been speaking about anti-Black racism with enough specificity. And this summer of social justice has allowed us to at last say, as the young people say, bun bame. Let's let go of this big generalization and look at how specific and pernicious anti-Black structural racism and inequality operates within our country. And then what can we do about it? And my joy, I'll end, is that I think that the listening amongst my white colleagues and peers have been deeper than I have witnessed in the 4 uprisings that I have lived through before on 2 continents, from Brixton to Toxteth, to Brixton 2, to Tottenham 2, to Baltimore during the first Black Lives Matter. I think the listening now is profounder, and we just have to make sure that we sustain this listening and that it doesn't become the fad of the day or of a very bad 2020 and disappears when we hit into 2021.
Thank you, Kwame. So Tim, to bring you in, Claudia, Kwame, positive broadly that there has been progress, but that this summer has opened people's eyes, got people to listen, a real chance for an irreversible step change forward. Is that a view that you share? And do you see any danger, Tim, that our hopes could be dashed, that we might look back on what's happened over the last few months and our response to it and wonder where that energy dissipated?
I think I start from the place that I share my panelists' optimism for the future. And I think as a father, as a Black man, I have to, because otherwise, as Kwame articulated at the end of his beautiful speech, otherwise, what's the point? And with them in my background, I have to do all I can to further that conversation. However, I'm slightly more cautious in that, having seen many of the events that Kwame just mentioned, the second set of riots and other things, which moved from, if we just take Floyd as a build-up, because for me, the most interesting conversations were about the Ahmaud Arbery case where he was able to be shot, and then Amy Cooper, who knew specifically that she could weaponize her whiteness to attack somebody of a black male position when she was actually in the wrong. That for me was the most difficult moment of the recent act. And sitting on the Windrush Commission, I am really appalled that we still have systemic issues which will discriminate against individuals who are black. Given that they were called to help build this country that we are proud to call home, we still have a systemic element which many will try to deny as delusion in black people's minds. So I am very hopeful. I have to be, because that's what we fight for. That's why we stand on these platforms, to dispel the myths that are out there. But as a man who was arrested or strip searched in the street as a 15-year-old male by police, just because I fitted a description, to the point where I now still see many individuals alienated from workplaces because they have more melanin, something they cannot control in their skin, and based on the fact that that makes them othered, that for me is a worry that we need allies, which is important around this current time, because I think the power of social media has meant that nobody can say they didn't know or it wasn't a reality. And when I have my Jewish colleagues who I've stood next to and been allies around why we mustn't support anti-Semitism, when I have my sexual different individuals from myself who have appreciated that I've gone on pride marches and will fly a rainbow, they are appreciative of my allyship there. I now think this moment is incredibly important, where allies need to shout the cause and be racist, as opposed to say, I didn't do it. They must call out when they see it done, because the predication for bias training as a solution, a 1 hour online version as it is now, which will cure all the ills of worlds, is needed to be replaced by strategies which interrupt bias. Because for me as a leader within an organization, for me as somebody who's run a company, if I have a problem, I'm not going to go to the individual who is suffering from that problem. The exhaustion of my fellow black colleagues who are being asked to give their time on consultancy basis for free has to stop. Because if I wanted to change the risk profile of my organization to better position it to win business or go up, I'd find a consultancy who I'd pay a premium to deliver that expertise. We have lots of guided experts who understand the diversity and inclusion problem. Pay the money to get the expertise to change the framework. That's the bit I would say to our leaders, because I'm seeing many organizations who are doing that, who are signing up to commissions, which backs up their rationale, putting lovely statements with action behind the scenes.
Tim, thanks for that. Look, really vivid contributions. I wanted to move a bit more towards the kind of question of what we do. And again, I want to kind of start off a little bit with the experience that I have as chief executive of an organization. But I want to respond to the points that you made, and particularly actually to Kwame's point about the specificity of some elements of this. So what happened at the RSA is that following an initial response from the organization, which wasn't strong enough, and a very, very powerful pushback from staff and fellows that we were just not responding as we should have done to this moment. We then brought in well-paid consultants who listened. And one of the really shocking things for me was, if you had said to me 6 months ago, is the RSA an organization where if people feel they've been badly treated, they can talk about it? I said, of course, we have staff meetings, we're all really nice to each other, we have Christmas parties, It turned out that an awful lot of stuff had never been said, and that it took experts with expert skills to come in and to give people permission to talk about it, right? Now, what almost comes out of that, to Kwame's point, is the subtlety, the texture, specificity of people's experiences, that people who felt they've been excluded as a result of mental health issues, it's a different story for the people who feel that they may have been subject to assumptions which reflected racism, sexism, or whatever. So there's a need to get into the kind of specificity of this. But the danger there it is. I think that people end up thinking, oh my God, I need a strategy for every, what do I do? I've got to have the right approach to every single kind of challenge in my organization, whether it's Islamophobia or black racism or homophobia or whatever it is. I do think you have to go through that. You have to understand the very specific experiences that people have, the specific forms of exclusion. But then I think, and this is where the RSA is getting to now, you then have to say, fine, but what are the shared behaviors, the shared values, the shared culture that you need to have in order that everybody feels that they do have a voice and that they can talk about their experience, and that we do get over the thing that the RSA had allowed to happen, which was a lot of people wandering around feeling very hurt and not feeling that they could talk about it in a safe, or either in a safe way or in a way that made any point. I think it was partly, I don't feel safe talking about this. It was partly, what's the point of talking about this? It won't make any bloody difference anyway. And that was, what we heard. So that was kind of the arc that we've gone on. And we're now in this kind of space of saying, okay, what, as an organization, are the behaviors, the values that we need to have to be truly inclusive and to recognize the specificity of people's experiences. But I'm interested, you may have different accounts of what you've seen and what works and the right approach that we should take. So Kwame, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd start with Claudia because she speaks so brilliantly that I could just jump off the shoulders of that. but alas. I'll answer that question and I'll answer it directly and indirectly, if I may, and as succinctly as humanly possible. Look, there is a tax that comes along, a bandwidth tax that comes along with speaking truth to power in any way. I have negotiated with whiteness and white fragility all of my life. I don't think there is a person of color, a black person, that hasn't said, I can't say that in front of my white colleague, even if they're my peer or underneath me, for fear that it will fall into a kind of collective white fragility. That collective power will then somehow be punitive, and I will suffer for it. And I think it's the same when you're a boss. As I had my institution, that I, like you, Matthew, go, yay, we're all open, we talk, I hug everybody when I come in. Well, I used to pre-COVID. And, we all talk to each other in a way. But actually, I have to understand that there is a tax speaking truth to power. And no matter how open and down I think I am, there is always the connotation that if I say the wrong thing, I will fall out of favor. And I think that is what we have found in all of the institutions that I have spoken to, that all of a sudden this summer, much like Me Too, that we all had to go back in and do an audit. When Me Too hit the headlines, I don't know a brother or someone or a man that didn't go, oh my God, let me review my whole life. Not just the last 5 years, but my whole life. Did I, do I overtalk on women? Did I force them to have to lean in? Did I make a sexual innuendo joke that actually was uncomfortable for them and I thought it was really funny? Or I didn't really, we had to do that audit. Did I make a sexual advance when I thought it was open, but it wasn't? We all had to go back and do that audit. And it was uncomfortable and frightening and insecure, creating the earth beneath us as men started to quake and is still quaking. That is what my white colleagues are going through right now. And I have to understand that. I have to care for them and I have to show empathy for the fear that they are going through right now, that they will be revealed as not being 100% good people. But more than that, that they will somehow be chastised publicly in this world of social media. So really the way that I'm trying to lead myself through it is by saying to my white staff, I hear you and I care. And by saying to my black staff, I hear you and I care. And both of you together, or sometimes not together, find a way of speaking to said expensive consultant, so that it can come back to us and that we as an organization can understand that though the organization is led by a black male, it doesn't mean that it is not and has not inherited systemic racist structures. And I say, yes, it has. And my job is not to be the colored version of the thing that went before me, but to be my whole three-dimensional Black British self and create new systems that will reveal other systems that will need to change. And my final point on that is, and when I led a theater in America, we were talking about this in the way we're talking about this now, maybe 5-6 years ago. And I remember I was the only Black executive at the time. And I said to my senior management team, I'm the only Black executive here. What can we do? And lots of people, oh, we can't find the people and we can't blah, 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 blah. And one white ally came up to me later and she said, I will give up my seat at senior manager if you promise to promote an African-American into that seat. And I will never forget that woman. She did it. She gave up. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, because I recognize my privilege. I recognize that I can probably go out and get a job, a lot more than my Black peers can. And I'm going to do that. And I've got more savings than probably on average we perceived our African-Americans colleagues have to get me through. She understood structural inequality and did what we're now calling the Reddick. She said, here's my seat, but make sure that it serves structural inequality. And that I put down to all of my white peers in positions of power. Don't just talk the talk, walk it. If you can, seed your seat, seed your power. Now that's revolution. But that is the way of us moving forward in quantum leaps, not just incrementally.
Wow. Thanks, Kwame. Really powerful. Tim.
Wow. Now I wish I went first. What do you do? Unbelievable. That touched me so profoundly. It's unbelievable. I've been really fortunate that a number of allies have promoted me into positions where I can excel, where I'm able to be afforded the opportunity to dispel lots of myths that may come with the associated power that I have. And as a result, I take on the responsibility of making sure I never squander that opportunity. So it's a two-way conversation. But as Kwame said, the seat at the table has to be afforded to the individuals to make the changes that people want to see. I think we do have to, though, what we can with organizations on a positive note is that we can take some of the successes that we've seen with some more palatable areas of inclusion and diversity and the success that's been mobilized as a result in order to check those things. And that Me Too comment, Kwame, so beautiful in centering the conversation for me, because I know as an individual, I would now never want to go into a situation, make assumptions around people from particular religious backgrounds being, so for example, some of the stereotypes around association with money, or individuals from certain communities having an association with how they act or tolerate. There was a great documentary around Japanese individuals and a sexuality prowess around men particularly being under-sexualized, where men from Black communities are over-sexualized. So lots of the stereotypes that we would come in and we would never say in a workplace, for example, as a proud supporter of all diversity, I'd never come in to a sports environment and say, oh, that was so gay, for example, which used to be common parlance for many individuals around the workplace. Or, oh my gosh, you're so tight with money. Are you Jewish? Those horrible things that came out in the workplace that which we have to be able to talk to, and they are not tolerated. The great work that has happened to make that unacceptable in our workplaces, that should be same energy that's afforded to another element of diversity, which is around ethnicity. We should have the same energy that we've put into those initiatives, where we now proudly put multicolored flags on our logos, where we proudly stand up and say we support mental health, the UN global days, we stand next to them and put issues around being more unified. But you have to make sure that it's equally spread amongst all of the diversity you're trying to have the conversation and balance that out.
Great. Thank you. Claudia, I'm interested in, the practicalities in terms of what, you're a consultant, your HR background. Can you give some insight into the concrete things that you've seen people trying to do over the last few months or beyond that, which you think have really made a difference, and maybe things which people do that don't really work?
Let me start with the former. It's a lot more positive. So, and I refer to a CEO that I'm working with currently, who I really genuinely find inspiring. And he's managed to bring what I look for and what I encourage clients to bring when we do this work. I call it the 3 C's. He's curious, he's courageous, and he's caring. And those 3 things will take you far, and they have taken him. And it was prompted by the aftermath of the George Floyd incident, when he began a conversation in his organization, and I came in, and he was taken aback because he considers himself to have been complacent up until that point. He had no idea, because the ethos of their organization was really strong, positive, and call it even virtuous. He had no idea what people had been through. And then people had an opportunity to reveal their lived experience, and he was shocked. And he said to me, Claudia, some of my people have been living with PTSD. It's that, and I had no idea. And he's now fully committed to turning that around. And we have a plan, which involves giving people a voice, and it involves listening. And I see that in other engagements I have as well. I always bang the drum about collecting data. You need to have data. This thing needs to be visible before you know whether, you need to measure it so you know whether or not it's changing. But alongside that data is you also need to gather the lived experience. And it's understanding those stories. You mentioned it, Matthew. Understanding those stories that touches the heart, that opens people's hearts and minds to really go on this journey. And I think those are really important prerequisites for doing this. I have also correspondingly, sadly, seen people dance around this issue. If you think about the black post, the day everyone posted the black page on Instagram, things in that context, very PRE, very comms related, managing the optics, that's not going to get you anywhere. The train is leaving the station, and people who want to make a difference are really getting to the heart of the matter. But I think the route through is absolutely through people's stories. You need to be able to do the listening and to stand in their shoes. And when that empathy happens, then we can springboard from that into great things. Curiosity, courage, caring takes you a long way.
And Claudia, it feels to me as though a big part of this is also, how do you make sure that you create the spaces where all people feel that they can speak without being judged harshly? This seems to me to be absolutely critical to this. And let me give you an example of this and ask you to come back on that, Claudia, before I ask everybody else. Ask Tim and Kwame a final question as well. So RSA board this week. RSA trustee board this week, right? A trustee board which was all white until a few months ago, which is shameful, but that fortunately now is changing. Has changed, and we need to go, and it needs to go further. But on the board, 2 papers. One paper from our diversity and inclusion consultants, which was really reporting some of the stuff I've talked about in terms of revealing a lot of hurt, a lot of stuff that we've got wrong, some really tough stuff to read if you're prior to the organization, really important to read. And then a report on the statistics. And the statistics show that actually, we seem to be okay. We're predominantly female, we are pretty diverse in terms of pay gap around diversity or gender. Actually, things seem to be in the positive direction rather than the negative direction. Now, I think that some people will say, well, hold on, what's going on here? On the one hand, it looks like everything's fine. And on the other hand, everyone seems to be unhappy and aggrieved, or a lot of people feel unhappy and aggrieved. Now, I think you've got to have that conversation. You've got to say to people, look, you can be both an organization that looks as though ostensibly it's kind of getting things right, but also an organization where people don't feel they're being heard and where there is a deep problem within the culture of the organization. These 2 things can both be true. But I think if you don't talk about it, people get lost and they think, well, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be achieving here. What is the measure of my success? What, as the person who runs the organization, what is the measure of success to be then, if it's not statistics? How do I do it in relation to feelings? So sorry, Claudia, to go on, but I just, that seems to me to be the kind of conversation that we need to make sure people can have.
Matthew, I agree with you. And I think you've supplied the answer in the story that you tell. And I would suggest the answer is and. It can't be simply reviewing the statistics, and it can't only be looking at the lived experience. You need to combine the two. That gives you the rounded picture of where you are as an organization. I mean, isn't it telling that you could have such really chastening personal stories and at the same time your data is clean, quote unquote? So you're saying that it's possible to have the two apparently in contradiction, but it's not necessarily a contradiction, but it is a reminder that you need to keep your eye on the ball, which means both of those things. And some of your measures need to be around what is employee voice? How engaged are our people? What are they saying about what's it like to live and work in this organization? How do we manage microaggressions? Have I been othered? How many times have I been othered in the last 6 weeks? We need to keep those conversations alive, and not just, or in addition to, I should say, the pay gap and the representation and those other quantitative metrics that we need to look at. It's both. I'd say and I think you're well on the way.
Thank you, Claudia. Okay, look, we've got 5 minutes to go. We've got a fantastic audience of people who really make a difference in their organizations. And I want us, all four of us, to send people off with a strong message that they can take, which will lead them to want to take more action in this area. And I know that I've talked to Jim Birtwell, and we're keen after the event to see what we can do to support people to make change as we take this agenda forward. So one message I want from each of you, and I'm going to abuse my position as chair to start off. And I might be, look, I'm going out on a limb here, and folks tell me, well, I don't just say this to any of you, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong. I want to say this. It is not wrong for you to have got it wrong, to get it wrong, to not be sure, to make mistakes. Do not think that what you need to do following this conversation is to kind of curl up in the kind of fetal position and go, oh my God, I'm not perfect and I may have made mistakes, and what am I going to do? That it is not required that you are perfect. But what I think is required, and this is the journey I have been on, is what is required is that you see this as a positive opportunity for your organization, right? And that, I have to tell you, there were times when I have not felt that way. I have just felt that I wanted to curl up in a ball and I wanted people to say, Matthew, you're not that bad, right? I really, really have been into that position. And what I've come through now is to actually finally, it took a while, and it took my colleagues, I didn't do it myself, by the way, it was my staff who got me there, to go, this is such a brilliant opportunity to make the organization a better organization, and it's really exciting. And so I would say to you, you don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be positive. That's my message. Okay. Tim, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think the first and the most important thing for me is that people have to acknowledge that leadership is hard. Leadership is not a linear process which only goes up and is successful. To be in the seat, it is often hot and it is often hard, but that's okay. Because if you can acknowledge that you don't know all the answers, leaders are not supposed to know all the answers, but they are supposed to consult widely and appreciate the fact that they may have to bring together divergent people, thoughts, cultures, religion, races, whatever it may be. And that synergy that comes from that beauty is where the power of diversification lands on making you different from everybody else. Because if you want to be the employer of choice, if you want to be the place that people come and give more, that has to be. And looking at the likes of Facebook and others who are openly with their CDO, plastering over the statistics which show what changes have happened, why that's happened. I wish I had as much money as them, but they're doing their stuff. That's important. And I think having the authenticity to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn, is really important. And I'll finish because I want to make sure I hear from the others, is that my children are the most important thing in my life. My wife knows how much I would sacrifice and do, and we do as a family. If you imagined, and this is the bit where I think leadership really comes into it, all of your staff are like your children. How would you treat them? What would you want for them? What would you put in place that facilitates their ultimate growth, where they could fall, trip, make mistakes, but you would encourage them anyway? If you apply that as a leader for all of the people in your business, you're starting on a direction. And if you feel uncomfortable, maybe it's not the right place for you to lead within, and you might need to find another home to sit in.
Such a powerful point about the nature of leadership, Tim. Absolutely right. And I think COVID has done this as well. It's encouraged a more open, vulnerable form of leadership, and we mustn't let go of that when COVID's passed. Thank you for that. Kwame?
I would say be courageous and extend what risk looks like for you and your organization. And in doing that, you will find brilliance. You will discover brilliance. You will open markets that you didn't even know existed. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Brilliant, brilliant. Claudia.
Thank you, Matthew. I think this is an opportunity for us, for organizations, to create or to go for the holy grail, that psychological safety, where people can make mistakes and it's okay, and we can hold each other up, and everyone is happy to reveal their desires and their mistakes and all of it, and their brilliance. And it's in that environment that you actually spark off each other and get the best. People look at me sometimes like a fish with a square head when I say this, but I think too few people see the upside of this diversity and inclusion thing. You can get brilliant performance when you bring people together and unleash them in a way that they will deliver beyond your expectations. And that's the margin that we're missing. It's the opportunity in this whole conversation that I think more people can wake up to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claudia. So look, it's been a brilliant session. I think I've talked too much as chair, but I'm sorry. It's just because I'm so interested in this stuff, but I apologize for that. Kwame, Claudia, Tim, wonderful session. And as I say, I think we're intending to take this work further forward. It's been brilliant talking with you. Tim, I think I'm passing back to you now.
You are indeed. Thank you very much for that. Amazing panel. Thank you so much, Matthew, for leading us through, and Kwame for giving your continued support. And Claudia, amazing in terms of what you delivered, the articulation of brilliance. Hopefully more people in HR take those positions. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. But we move swiftly on. Take care. See you later.